Good evening, friends. Operational situation by the end of the 10th of June. On this broadcast, we will talk with you in more detail about the Pokrovsky direction, Veliko-Novoselkovsky, Ugoldarsky, and also briefly touch the Seversk direction, along the Kharkiv border, without significant changes, except that the activity of tactical aviation. Operational tactical aviation is reported again. We see that the enemy is again increasing pressure with bombs. But this is no longer the Lipsovo direction, namely Volchansk, along Volchansk itself, making further attempts to improve the tactical situation. At the same time, in general, the situation has not yet undergone significant changes. There are attempts, which we talked about yesterday on one of the airwaves, to circumvent. Most likely, the situation is still looming. To circumvent the positions, or to expand the zone of active hostilities as a whole. But already east of the northern part of Volchansk, that is, the field will be flooded within the gray zone. Footage was published. The presence of the enemy is periodically there, that is, it breaks through. Well, conditionally we will speak to the quiet, to the Volchansky farms. Makes attempts. For the city itself, we have not yet fixed any changes in terms of personnel. Not from our side, not from the side of the Russian troops. Active military operations are continuing in the area of Stepovaya Novoselovka and Ivanevka. Along the Military-Svitovsky section of the front, there is further pressure from the enemy. Most likely, as it is now reported, yes, the enemy is becoming even more active. Well, we have already discussed this with you in general in the Kapinsky direction, that there are some attacks. There are some movements south of Alshana, east of Sinkovka, that is, there are a number of attempts. Therefore, there is pressure, and most likely, given the fact that they have transferred and tightened some forces, they will only strengthen in the near future. Therefore, we are aimed at a typical new settlement, and not at the Sinkovka itself, but just to break through. Well, let's say conditionally to Sandy 4 now, in the direction of Sandy, let's say so. It is clear that this may last for 6 months or a year, taking into account the fact that we have had minimal changes in general over the past year. Yes, the last activity is quite serious in the form of 4 settlements and the remaining part of Berestovoy and Tebayevka. But still, we state that the enemy most likely, based on the information that is available, will increase pressure on the Kapinsky direction. There was a number of news on the Seversky direction today. Why do I say that we will stop there a little bit? It means that the Russian troops allegedly managed to occupy the entire territory of the chalk quarry. A number of Russian OSINTers have drawn this on their map, but in fact, I would say so, statements are premature. At least on their part, because well, there is no success, despite the fact that they are making a number of attempts. Therefore, whether they will have such success in the future, time will tell. But today these reports do not correspond to reality. But why are they there? The fact is that with the territory of the substation, there are a number of attacks and attempts to gain a foothold at the chalk quarry. They do periodically enter the gray zone, that is, the territory of the chalk quarry, but it is not possible to gain a foothold, due to the way drone pilots, mortar, artillery work. Therefore, so far, we are not recording any changes. At the same time, we state that active hostilities continue. And they asked me to comment on the headline, because there are a number of further messages, but let me tell you so. Naturally, there was an attack from the enemy. We added a small section of the gray zone. The attack managed to repel for the most part, yes, but this is not one attack, because it was before the 5th, right? I forgot. About the 5th, yes, maybe 5 days, 6, 7 days ago, about in this range. So, with the support of armored vehicles, an attempt to improve the tactical situation. As you remember, we corrected the gray zone, we could not break through. But we really see that the pressure on Razdalovka is increasing, at least 4 now. In this time interval that we have, we see this activity. But the further messages that are received, they are no longer tied up with any reliable facts, or with a drone shot. That they continue to go out to the outskirts of Razdalovka, and so on and so on. The fighting is really going on, there are indeed attempts to break through to Razdalovka. But the APU manages to keep the situation under control. In any case, According to the last frames that we saw from the drone, we have no significant changes in the situation. As we said, the enemy continues to transfer personnel to the Canal microdistrict in the Chasky direction. It is clear that there is also a transfer of equipment. Naturally, the line has shifted, pounds. The line of active clashes is also shifting. It is necessary to understand that it naturally becomes, taking into account where the enemy is now, approaching the channel, yes. It becomes naturally more difficult to control all his actions. It also needs to be understood. Therefore, now he is making a lot of attempts to pull up forces in part of the Canal microdistrict. But we are not registering any significant changes yet within the gray zone. We turn to the Pokrovsky direction. Our main changes are the Velikonovoselkov direction. According to Pokrovsky, we will consider 2 points. This is Novoalexandrovka and conditionally human Novoselovka the first. Today, there is a lot of discussion about the overall situation in Novoalexandrovka, including Russian telegrams. Date information that leaked that the fighters retreated, left their positions, and so on and so on. Look, naturally, against this background, there will be a lot of misinformation being inflated now. In order to further demoralize the fighters, in order to naturally reduce morale, and so on and so on. A similar situation has already been beyond Cheratin, it was said, but there is really nothing supernatural. There are life factors and people have fear. It is also necessary to understand this. You need to understand a lot of things happening around and open your eyes, see what they are. How these people were mobilized, what was said to them when they were mobilized, how they were trained. Because the fighters themselves, we have also already published this, yes, the commanders on the ground, everything is here, that well. The training they have undergone is not enough. Others pass, and on the contrary, they have very good training. Therefore, the situation of discord is a human factor. Alas, no one is immune from this. And, unfortunately, the enemy, we state that now has further success. Now there is a situation, and the question is whether it will gain a foothold in the remaining part of Novoalexandrovka. But given the situation, of course, there are no positive forecasts, alas. And of course it will continue its pressure, but it is no longer natural in the direction of Vozdvizenka. Or Vozdvizenka-Lozovatsky. It will most likely be in a southerly direction, as he planned, as he is trying to make his way to the Falcon. And further messages have been received today, and not only messages, but footage has been published, including from the enemy. He is actively working on the first new settlement. Now, of course, we can talk about the port of preparation, but in any case, the enemy is trying to break through to it. That is, as we said, for him it will not be Novopokrovskaya's first goal, not Sokol, but namely to break through to the first Novoselovka. Especially taking into account the current situation in general, which is developing in our country and in the area of Novoalexandrovka. I mean logistics routes, and so on, and so on. It has become easier for them to work a little bit by promoting Amansky. In other words, Dranovody work throughout this area, and it is natural that, let's say, it is very difficult to move from the north to Novoselovka first. We all understand this. It is clear that there is movement, it is very difficult. And, accordingly, with the Falcon, the situation is similar, and the enemy is approaching the advanced positions. Therefore, the situation remains very, very difficult. Active fighting continues. And we are moving with you to the Veliko-Novoselkovsky direction, where our main disadvantage is the Staromayorskaya. There was a lot of information from the Russian side after lunch that they managed to completely occupy the settlement. Plus there was information from the Russian Defense Ministry that, well, they reported that they completely occupied the settlement. Yes, indeed, they have published footage where they are present in the northern part. The flag was installed, 2 flags in the northern part of the settlement. So far we are adding a red and gray zone, but not completely for the entire locality, because there are a couple more nuances. You know that very many times the Russian Defense Ministry has reported something that is not there. And it was Nevelskaya, and it was K-Markets, it was a job, and so on and so on. Therefore, I will not give these examples. I can't say that the situation with us, as in the positive so far, because the enemy was pushing, he was transferring forces. He was hitting the crop, that is, he maneuvered as best he could, pulled up, and of course he has. So far, we are talking about partial success in the northern part, because we do not have visual data on the remaining part. But there is no positive so far. Despite the fact that he presses very seriously in this area, including on the harvest. Fruitful, if you manage to fight back so far. Moreover, we are already saying that there have been attempts from 3 directions. Do not forget that we considered with you a few days ago, so we tried to strike a flank attack, then we managed to repel this attack. We corrected it. Only the situation in the zone was reflected, not to let them enter the harvest. Therefore, so far there have been no significant changes. But according to Staromayorsky, unfortunately, we have one of the disadvantages. On further clarification of the situation, if there is official information or confirmation from the fighters or drone footage, we will paint over. But the situation remains, in principle, so far I say, complicated. And in fact, yes, having lost, if we talk about visual data, having lost 80–85% of the settlement, it is clear that there are 15 to 20% of it already remains a matter of time for the enemy. Extremely difficult, taking into account the fact that they are pulling up their own drones, and of course they work in small towns. And it is very difficult to provide logistics on such a small area, taking into account the topographic component, where we have heights, where we have a lowland located along the river, and plus logistics. Novodonetsky was active, as you remember, also managed to reflect. In general, if we are talking about the Velikonovo-Selkovsky direction, the eastern flank holds, while the western one, of course, is a minus. And he also spoke of the Ugledar direction. We will go through it briefly with you. Active assault operations are continuing. We also said on the previous broadcast that there are a number of attempts from the Russian side to break through to the north. There was an attack. We did not add a gray zone with you anymore, we talked about this moment. It was possible to reflect again. And after that, information is received again, that they continue attacking actions, continue their attacks. So, including not only about cars, but also on motorcycles. On motorcycles mainly, I would say, we have a southern part. It means that the main strike, the northern one, for the most part, is armored vehicles. Well, it is clear that the situation is different, and they will definitely apply them further. There is one more point to note that we have learned relatively, I emphasize relatively, but to fight those so-called Sultan Sarai turtle tanks, the so-called. Yes, they have already published a lot of frames, they are being beaten up, destroyed, they are being beaten up, they are achieving, and so on. Therefore, they did not become a panacea. The panacea so far remains for them, the superiority of operational and tactical aviation, and, of course, the airstrikes of this tactical aviation. As for these tanks, yes, they certainly exhaust the number of our drones, I won't deny it, but, let's just say, they gradually learned how to deal with them. Now a very big bet is now being placed on motorcycles, on maneuverability, as we see, in principle. This is happening along the entire length of the front, including in Volchansk itself, in the Volchansk direction. In other words, both ATs and motorcycles have been involved, so they are naturally trying to apply tactics everywhere, and, due to this, have at least partial success due to maneuverability.